So just real quick, who am I? My name is Shane Young. I am a SharePoint Server MVP. Have been so for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, so long time coming. But I am also, as part of that role, or what has gotten me that role maybe, is, I do SharePoint consulting, training, writing, and speaking. I'm also hoping one day to learn how to do math and arithmetic, but right now those are the only things I know how to do. And just for kind of a background, my background is the admin side, right? So I am a former Windows MCSE, so I've done Active Directory, SQL, firewalls, all that fun type of stuff, Exchange. So when I come into SharePoint, that's kind of the perspective that I have. But I have been doing SharePoint exclusively for the last 6 years, and I've been using SharePoint 2010 for over a year now. So a lot of fun things here I hope we can share with you. You can see there's my email address, my blog. I am the owner of SharePoint 911, so that's my SharePoint consulting company. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all those fun places. So hopefully you are a social networking person and want to connect up. I'm always happy to do that. And then myself, Todd Clint, and Steve, we just finished our SharePoint 2010 Administrator's book. That is a link to how you can grab the book. Okay. That's it. That's all the slides I have. Thanks for coming today. No, I'm just kidding. So what we're going to do now is instead of giving you a bunch of PowerPoints and slides on all the different functionality with screenshots, I found it's just easier to dive right in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and I'm going to attempt to share my desktop. Hopefully I am that smart. I think I am. And real quick before I get too far here, I need to do 2 little housekeeping tasks. There we go. Okay, perfect. So this is SharePoint 2010 Central Administration. Right when you come in here, you can definitely tell there's a new look and feel here. Right? There is this idea that everything's kind of broken up into little sections. So if you think back to SharePoint 2003, we just had kind of like 1 or 2 pages with hundreds of links on them. Right? SharePoint 2007, we had the Application Management tab and the Operations Management tab. So we had those 2 different tabs, and then that was where we saw all the links. So this time, instead of just a couple of tabs, we're going to see down the left here we have 7 or 8 different pages that are going to help us manage the server. But at the same time, here on the home page, they've pushed forward to us the links to some of the more common used tasks. It's also worth noting that SharePoint Central Administration is a SharePoint site, right? So it's, the central admin URL is a SharePoint web application. In that web application, at the root of that web app, there is a site collection, and at the root of that site collection is this web, and this is where we manage SharePoint. So, for example, if you had a team of people that were managing this, you're like, hey, it'd be great if we could have a document library with all of our SharePoint install and configuration documents. No problem, right? It's a SharePoint site, so you could really go in here, site actions, and say, view all site content, and wait on the dramatic pause. But while we wait on the dramatic pause, see that in here, we have a shared documents library and such. So it really is just a SharePoint site. Okay, so now just to jump in here and kind of work through some of the nitty-gritty. Clearly, in an hour, we're not going to cover everything, but we're going to try and hit some of the high-level stuff. And we're going to try and drill into some of the ones, I know in the last year or so when I've been working with it, I've had to rediscover how to do some of the old tricks. So we're going to try and, make sure that we're communicating that type of things during the course of this demonstration. So I went into the Application Management tab. So I went over here on the left and clicked on Application Management. And so here you can see I've got web apps, site collections, service applications, and databases. So the first one we jump into here is Manage Web Applications. Manage Web Applications, you're going to see right away, has the ribbon, right? The ribbon or the Fluent UI has been introduced, and you'll notice that most of it is grayed out right now. So what you need to do is you need to select a specific web application, and then once you click on that web application, you're going to light up the different functionality that is available for this web application. Now, a good deal of the stuff that is here is the same as it was previously. Things like authentication providers, right? So going in here and choosing, whether we're using Windows Auth or Forms or some other type of authentication. Also, turning on anonymous access. It's still here. So the core stuff, cancel out of that. Now, the reason I point out the anonymous access was under authentication providers is a lot of people have been confused, like I need to turn on anonymous, and so they go here to anonymous policy, and then they're like, wait a minute, this is a bunch of either none, deny write, or deny all. So this is where you can say what type of effect anonymous has once it's been enabled. But at first you have to do it over here on authentication providers, defaults, and enable anonymous access. Now this is because if you think about it, one of the key things that's very important to understand from a supporting SharePoint and troubleshooting SharePoint standpoint is the fact that IIS does authentication and SharePoint does authorization. Right? That sounds like the same thing, and it's not immediately obvious why I bring that up so clearly, but the key thing to understand is when you first hit the URL, portal.contoso.com is shown here. When you first hit that URL and you get the little gray pop-up box, right, you have to type in domain, /name, and then your password. That is IIS prompting you for that authentication. IIS is then saying, okay, let me take what you just typed in here, go talk to the authentication source, the authentication manager, which is typically like, Active Directory, and make sure this is a valid username and password. So that's the portion of authenticating you. Once that's done and successful, IIS hands you off to SharePoint, who says, yep, this is domain/user. Now we need to make sure that this user is authorized. And that is up to SharePoint to determine whether or not you can see the page or the item that you are trying to navigate to. So when you're troubleshooting, if you get people who call you up and say, hey, SharePoint's broke, I can't get in. Every time I do, I get the gray box 3 times and it, gives me a blank screen or some type of unauthorized message, or sorry, access denied message. That is typically IIS authentication, right? So something is wrong with their username and password. So they're having a problem authenticating. It's not even getting to SharePoint. If they say that they get the gray box and they type it in successfully, and once they've done that, they're getting a page that says domain/user access denied, click here to request access or to sign in as another user, that is telling you that SharePoint is not authorizing that user to get to that piece of information. So another place that comes into place, people ask me things like, hey Shane, can SharePoint handle, smart cards or something like that? And my answer always back to them is, well, can you set up IIS to authenticate with a smart card? They're like, yeah, we do that all the time. Okay, that's fine. Go do that in IIS or whatever whatever's out in front. Let that authentication happen, and then SharePoint will worry about authorizing them once you get them authenticated. So just a little nugget there to steal. Okay, so now here on my web, if I go over and I look at general settings, if you just click on general settings, this is going to be pretty much the same as it was in 2007 as far as web app general settings, right? So alerts and, how does the, can we send username and password? One of the new changes in SharePoint 2010 is that from a branding perspective, it used to be that the underscore layout pages all used application.master. They can still use application.master, but if you wanted the layout pages to be branded the same, you would take the default here and say, hey, let pages and layouts actually reference the site master page. So that's a big step forward for a branding perspective. And recycle bin and that type of stuff is here. Maximum upload size, still 50 megs by default. With that 50 meg default, you can still increase it up to 2048. So 2 gigs is still our maximum upload size. If you are going to change the upload size to something extreme, make sure you're also checking, your IIS timeouts and the different upload web configs and that type of stuff to make sure you're not timing out if you're going to increase this to some crazy number. All right, let's cancel out that. Now, if you hit here on the web app, so with our web app still highlighted, if you hit the drop-down for general settings, you're going to see we get a few other things. So general settings, resource throttling, workflow, outgoing email, mobile account, and SharePoint Designer. So 2 of them worth talking about real quick. The resource throttling, this is where we can control how large of a view someone can create, right? So it's whether or not, how many items a user can return in a single view. So this is going to help you scale better, right? SharePoint 2010 is going to support you creating lists up to 50 million items, but you don't want a user creating a view that tries to render all 50 million items at once, right? It would never work, and in the process of not working, it would take your whole farm down. So with the list view thresholds here, you can say, you know what, a user can never create a view that has more than 5,000 items. And that's the default setting. There's a lot more here. I don't want to get too detailed with the resource throttling, but it is worth noting that I've seen a couple people upgrade, and post-upgrade, all of a sudden they're getting these weird throttling messages about large lists and things, and they don't know where it's coming from. So that's being derived from this resource throttling functionality here. All right, so let's cancel all the resource throttling. Also over here, we've got the SharePoint Designer settings. And so this is where, as the administrators, we can control what people can do with SharePoint Designer in our web application. So this is another little nugget. By default, they can do anything and everything, but it's worth you considering, if that's going to meet your governance policies. All right, we'll cancel out of that. So here we're still managing features, managing paths, right? This is our managed paths for location of site collections. We also get these service connections. And if we do service connections, this is where we say, hey, what group of service applications, or what service application group is this particular web application associated with? Now, the reason I point this out is it's a little unexpected, I think, for the first time you come in here. So normally, by default, we're going to use the default group, and it's going to say, all right, here are all the different service applications that have been part of that default group, and that's what I'm consuming. That's generally where most people start out, and it works well. Notice here, though, we can't manage default from this screen. Okay? The other option that you get out of the box is this custom. Right? And so it's bracket, custom, bracket. And now this custom one I can manipulate right here on the fly. Now the reason that I point this one out is that the custom service application group is a one-use thing. It's not a reusable group. So when we create custom here, right, so we got the first, these like that. We got the first 4 boxes checked for custom here. But down here we say, okay, if I go to another web application, such as this one, and I say service connections, and if I choose default, and then I switch back over to custom, you're going to see that this one has 5 different things in its custom, right? We'll add the bottom 3, or those 3. We'll say, go back to our portal guy and do service connections. He still just has his 4, right? Each instance of custom is unique, and it's not reusable. So the question quickly becomes, well, all right, I get that, so I'm going to use the default service application group for most things, right? Because most of my web application, I use the default service application group. But I have a couple other a couple of web applications that I want to be able to reuse a custom group, but I don't want to use custom where I have to maintain that myself. So how do I overcome that problem? Glad you asked. It was a very good question. So I'm going to go over here to run PowerShell. And I don't want to get too far PowerShell, but one thing I always use, I use a get command, and then I do star proxy star, because I know that service applications are done via what's called proxies here in PowerShell. And so this is going to get me all the commands that have the word proxy in it. And so I know that there's a commandlet here, a new one, right? And so I'm going to look for new, and I'm going to say new SP service application prox. That sounds about like what I'm looking for. So I'm going to do new SP service application. I'm going to actually hit the tab key here, and it's going to auto-complete for me. Now, I don't want new service application pool, so I'll hit tab again. New service application proxy group. Perfect. And then I'm going to call this one TechNet, just make it easy. And that's all I have to do, is I have to specify the service application proxy group name. So there it is. It's now created me one named TechNet. Okay. So if we go back over here, before I show you how to use it, I want to show you where it's not. So if I go back to application management, and if I go then to under service applications, I go to configure service application associations, you're going to see that, okay, so this web app's using its custom, this web app has its own custom, this one's using this group, this group, and another custom. Now, you notice here, though, I don't see the TechNet group that we just created. Now, if I went into one of the groups that was here, like default, this is how I manipulate what's in default and what is not in default. Right? The same goes with custom. If I want to change it for this one, I'd do it here. So, what I really would like to see is my TechNet group show up here so that I can manipulate it, right? Because there is a bunch of fancy PowerShell that we could write to update that TechNet group, or that TechNet Service Application group, but I don't like to do PowerShell. I'm very lazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Application Management, Manage Web Applications, and I'm SharePoint Portal Contoso 80, Service Connections. From the drop-down, I'm going to choose TechNet. Okay, you can see it's all grayed out, and I can't modify it. That's okay. Now we're going to go back to Application Management, and we're going to go to Configure Service Application Associations. And now, there's our TechNet group. We select it, and so now I can make it be whatever it is I wanted it to be. So this is keeping me from having to write a bunch of PowerShell to manipulate the group. Instead, we just took advantage of the GUI functionality. It gave us the same end results, and it was a lot less typo prone, and I didn't really want you guys to see how bad of a typer I was either. So hopefully that little nugget works out for you. Now remember, most environments will not use proxy groups or service application groups. You're not going to need them, right? Because you're going to just use the default group. If you have any custom needs, it'll probably be all one-offs, and if it's just a one-off, you're not going to need a group. It's only for my larger customers with lots of web applications that end up needing 3 or 4 different sets of groups that would implement something like that. Okay. So that was Manage Our Web Apps. Configure, alter, and access mappings are here just the same as they were previously. Your site collection management stuff, this is also pretty much spot on the same thing as it was before. Not a lot new there either, so we'll skip through that. Service applications. So here, we looked at Configure Service Application Associations, but what we want to also do is look at Manage Service Applications. So this is going to show me all of the different service applications available in my farm. And what you're going to see here is you're going to have a nice little interface for working with those service applications. Now, it's important to keep in mind, though, that the Service Application Framework, it is just that. It is a framework, and it's completely flexible, right? So it's really just kind of like this thing that in SharePoint 2010 that someone can create a service app and plug into. And what portions of that plug they choose to implement is kind of up to them. Right? So, for example, if you go here to my Manage Metadata service, when I click on this, everything up here lights up, right? So I can go into like Properties and say, oh, okay, this is where my database name was specified. In fact, we're using Windows Auth. What app pool we're using. You can also see here the failover server. So if you haven't seen this yet, in SharePoint 2010, SharePoint understands mirroring. Okay? So what that means is that we can say, I'm going to set up SQL Server into, my failover cluster. I'm just going to name it failover cluster because I'm very creative. But so here, this is my primary database server. This is where the database is. If I go on a SQL Server and I configure this database to mirrored to this other SQL Server, right, what will happen is if for whatever reason this database stops responding on the primary database server, SharePoint is now going to be smart enough to go and look at the failover server and say, hey, I'm looking for this. Do you have it? Can I use your copy? So it's up to you to configure all of these SQL mirroring and make a plumbing work. But once you do, SharePoint will just keep right up with that without any issue. So that's pretty good stuff. All right, and we'll scroll down here. So anyway, that was some of the things, a property of the Manage Metadata service. Let's cancel out of that. We also have administrators. So administrators are an interesting topic, right? This is where I can actually set up what we call a delegated administrator. So here you can see I have a HR-only metadata service application I created, right? My HR group, they needed their own service application. They came to me, they made the request, I said, all right, no problem, here you go. So I gave them their own service application. Right now, I have to go in and manage that for them, right? So I actually have to click on this, go into manage, and I have to work with all their term set, right? I have to adjust their dogs for them. That's not a lot of fun for me. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to make it so that HR can come in here and manage their own term store through the same interface. So what I can do is click on this, do administrators, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add Tyson. So I'm going to type in Tyson, I'm going to hit Control K, it looks him up, there he is, there's Tyson. And I'm going to say Add Tyson, and then now I'm going to select Give him full control of this service application. Click OK. So what I've just done is I've made Tyson a delegated administrator. So if we go back to the home page of Central Administration, and we say sign in as a different user, and this is Tyson is my dog, so that's why I know his username and password. I don't want you to think anything shady is going on here. When I log in as Tyson, I'm brought here to Central Administration. It's the same, but you notice all the other stuff is missing. The only thing I have is under Application Managed Service Applications. I go into Service Applications. I only see HR only metadata. I select it, and I only get the Manage option here. So then I click on, and I can either click Manage here or click the name directly to be taken to Manage. But now Tyson's in here, and he can do what he needs to do to manage the dog HR information. So that's a pretty cool level of functionality. Now, if we go back to the home page here, we'll sign back in as myself. Nobody look at my password, ... Okay, so now if we go back over here, what we would see is that the way they did this is you go into Site Actions, Site Permissions, there's a group called Delegated Administrators, and in this group, Tyson's been added. So that was how Tyson got access to the Central Admin web, and then they used security trimming to only show him the links he had access to. Now, one thing worth noting in the cleanup process here, though, is if I go back to Manage Service Apps, notice it's one of the links on the home page. I go back into Manage Service Apps, and I go back to HR only metadata, and I hit Administrators. And if we choose to remove Tyson, right, he's been a bad dog, we're going to take him out. He's gone, but if we go to Site Action, Site Permissions, he is still listed as a delegated administrator. So that would be up to me to remove him as a delegated administrator if I didn't want him to be able to get in anymore. Now, if he did log in right now, you'll see he goes to Manage Service Apps, but he has no service apps there to see. So, not too bad. All right. So let me sign back in as myself so we can actually do things. There's my ... password again. Okay. So that was over here. Let's go back to Manage Service Apps. So click on Excel Services, for example. Now notice when I click on Excel Services, the Properties button doesn't light up here, right? Because even though it's a consistent interface, different groups wrote their service apps to take advantage of different pieces. So they didn't need a Properties section, so it's not lit up. When I click on this guy, Properties lights up. So don't let that throw you for a loop. Now the nice thing about this being a framework also is the fact that your third parties are going to be able to implement their functionality as service applications. So instead of them, writing their own management tools and you having to learn a whole new interface, if they're doing it right, you should be seeing their stuff here in this interface just the same. Something else worth pointing out is, for example, if we go in here to the User Profile Service application, and I do administrators here, you're going to see that it has a more full fidelity type of permission levels. So just something to keep in mind as well is that each service application, you're probably going to see different options available here, if any at all, right? So continuing here to go back to the Manage Metadata Service application. So we looked at how we clicked in here and we got to the management interface, right? Now, it's a little point out now that some people are like, hey, how do I manage search this time around, right? It took me a little bit to find search the first time I got in here. So you'd come to the search service application, you click on this link, and then here you've got the same type of search administration interface you should be used to from the previous version. Now, in here, it's also worth noting that in SharePoint 2007, to configure search, whether servers were index servers or query servers, all of that was done through managing the service on server. That is not the case in 2010. Instead, this time, they've chosen to have the search service application implement its own topology management tool, right? So we come in here, we say modify, and so here you have where you're going to specify what's my crawl servers, what's my query servers. There's a lot of new functionality, right? This interface and the configuration options for search have completely changed. So make sure before you start planning out your farm that you learn about the new search architecture to understand how to implement it, because it's not the same functionality as it was in 2007. Well, so you're going to get the same end result, but you're going to have flexibility. It means a lot of things to think about before you start configuring that information. Okay. Another thing we're thinking here with our service application. So, for example, the Manage Metadata Service application, you can actually publish this across farm. So if you wanted to have one farm with the Manage Metadata Service application, the Search Service application, and one dedicated farm to running some of your major service applications, and then consume that from other departmental or divisional type farms, you can do that. And what you need to do is you need to publish those service applications, and then that makes it externally accessible. Now, before you get too deep into that, though, you are going to need to configure the trust relationships between the farms, and that's going to require some PowerShell. You essentially have to go to each server or each farm and export a certificate, and then import that into the other farm. And then once you've done that, you kind of then have to specify that those farms, what levels of sharing they're allowed to do. So there is a little more configuration to it before you get into it. So if you're going to publish across farms, make sure that you are setting up this trust relationship, which requires PowerShell import-export certificates first. All right, so that's my quick rundown of the service applications. So let's go back over to application management. All right, so we've kind of looked at web apps, service applications, and site collections. Managed content databases, this stuff is still the same type of interface as it was in 2007, so nothing new here. Other than an update of terminology to say current number of site collections, it used to say current number of sites. In here, this is where I could specify specific content database where its failover went, just the same. And you'll also notice that this time around, timer jobs. So for timer jobs that are web app or content database specific, so ones that are associated with web applications, we can actually specify what server we'd like those ran on if needed to. So if you wanted to make sure that all your timer jobs for your content databases all ran on one server in your farm, just to kind of keep everything isolated and easier to troubleshoot maybe, this is where you would do it. So you could actually select which box in your farm runs your timer jobs. And it's just going to run the timer jobs associated with this specific database. Also notice here another addition is that we now have the database schema version. So this was a very nice step forward, I believe, because now it gives you a little more insight into what version your database is. And the reason that they did that in this version of SharePoint is the fact that SharePoint now understands this thing called compatibility boundaries. So with the compatibility boundaries, it is possible to patch your farm, right? So go to all your SharePoint servers and install maybe a security fix or something, some type of one-off patch, and deploy that to all the servers in your farm so you update the bits right away. But then not incur the database upgrade portion, right? Because database would still be inside what we call the compatibility boundary. So even though it would say that your current schema was 47301010, it might say that the maximum schema, so the schema that the farm would support, is 4927. I don't know, I'm just making up numbers. But the idea here is that you've got the current schema and then you'll have a maximum schema. And as long as you're inside the compatibility boundary, then you're going to be allowed to run in that state. So you got the patches deployed right away, but you didn't have to incur the database upgrade. So you can do more rolling type upgrades, or more rolling type patches, if you will. Typically, the only time that you won't be able to cross the compatibility boundary, and this is typically, right, this is not set in stone, but they're going to shoot for only the service pack. So all the hot fixes between RTM and Service Pack 1, those will all be, interchangeable as far as compatibility of the database level. Then at Service Pack 1, when you install the Service Pack 1, you're going to have to upgrade all those databases to get them all back to the same schema version and then continue forward. Now, if you wanted to quickly find out about that, what you could actually do is go over here to Upgrade and Migration, and they've given us a Review Database Status. And so this is where you would actually say, give me a report of all my SharePoint databases. So here they all are. And you can see that my farm is very happy because the status is no action required on all of the different databases. If one of these databases, you might see a couple of different options. One is you could see one that says upgrade possible but not required. That means you're inside the compatibility boundary. You're good. The other option you might see is upgrade required. So that one would mean that, hey, this database is still old. You need to get it up to the right version before it's a supported configuration again. So this Manage Database Upgrade Status screen is going to give us that type of feedback. All right, let's go right to App Management, Manage Content Databases. One last thing worth noting on content databases, and this functionality actually came in SharePoint version 3, Service Pack 2. But it's also in 2010 out of the box, and that is the fact that SharePoint understands content databases that are marked as read-only inside a SQL Server. Okay, what does that mean? So if we go here, let's go back to Application Management, Manage Web Apps, say URL SP911RC, right? So if I do this, let's make sure it's open. And while that's opening, we're going to go find the database for that. You can't find the database from here, so we got to go back to Application Management, Manage Content Databases. From the drop-down, choose Change Web Application. We're going to find our URL, so this one. So here we can see I've got a couple of different databases and different site collections. I'm pretty sure it's this one. And so the database name is WSS_content. Okay, so right now logged in here, you can see I've got all these new edit type of buttons, right? What I can do is I can go to the SQL side of the house. So I'm in SQL Server Management Studio now. Go to WSS_content, right-click on this database and say Properties. And on the Options tab, I actually have the option of setting the database to read-only. So database read-only, hit the drop-down and say True. I get a warning that's going to kind of reset all the connections, so you wouldn't want to do this on the fly for production if you weren't willing to have all the connections reset. Okay, so now I've changed this database to read-only inside a SQL Server. What happens in SharePoint? Let's go back and refresh this site in SharePoint. So we're still accessing this content in SharePoint, but right on the little Site Actions button, all my new and edit type of functionality is gone. Right? Even if I go into Shared Documents, I still cannot go in here and create new or upload documents. So what it's done is SharePoint understands that the database is now read-only inside a SQL Server. It's made all the site collections in that database read-only. So this is a great little trick, you guys. You're having to do like rolling upgrades, or you want to be able to set your 2007 farm to this read-only mode, right? Set your 2007 farm to read-only, and then once you get to, set it to read-only, back that database up, go upgrade it to 2010. Once you get on your 2010 farm, change the endpoint to your 2010 farm, boom, now people are getting the box, and now it's not read-only, so they're not getting the security termed interface. So pretty cool stuff there. Okay, so that gets us to the application management. Now if we look through system settings real quick, this is where you're going to see, some of those operation type things. So manage services and servers in the farm, manage services on server. Nothing really new here to cover. The new thing here, so we still have outgoing email, we still have incoming email, but now we can also configure SharePoint to be able to send SMS messages. So if you'd rather send text messages out instead of emails, that is configurable as well. You will need to subscribe to a service, the managed before you provide that functionality, but SharePoint supports that out of the box. Farm management, we have the same type of stuff, configure alternate access mappings, farm features, farm solutions. We have manage user solutions. So this is your sandbox code, right? Those sandbox solutions that people talk about where they want to allow users to upload a solution maybe to the site collection gallery and then use it, that particular functionality only in their site collection. So that's where you can manage this globally. If we jump over to the monitoring, monitoring could be a whole talk on itself, but I just want to hit a couple of things real quick in the monitoring. One is the improvement in the diagnostic logging. So if I go to configure diagnostic logging, here you can see that they've tried to make things a lot more, a lot more sense, right? So what am I adjusting the level for? In 2007, there was one called general administration you could change the level for. What was that for? I don't know. Maybe you know, but I didn't. I could never figure it out. It was not very, didn't make a lot of sense. So here I'm going to say, hey, I'm trying to troubleshoot access services. So I'm going to select this box, and I'm going to scroll down the page, and I'm going to say, I want to report verbose messages and verbose messages, right? This is why I'm troubleshooting. I'm going to scroll down, say OK. And now we'll go back into configure diagnostic logging. Look at what's happened. This is now bolded. So all of the things that are not at default are automatically set to bold. All right, we're going to continue that story, but I want to show you something before we fix that one. So we're going to leave these at bold for now. Scroll down the page. Trace logs, they are still on your C drive, 14 logs. If at all possible, get these off your C drive and get them onto some other drive letter, the drive, for example. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, is that this is a farm-wide setting. So every server in your farm has to have an E drive in order for this to work if you're going to change it to E:logs. If you were to change it all in the server in the farm today didn't have it, what would happen is logging would just stop working on that server. Not a huge deal. Not a good idea, but not a huge deal. But if you tried to add a server to this farm who did not have an E drive, you would get this weird file IO exception error message. And the first time I got it, it took me about 4 hours to troubleshoot. So just be sure if you're going to set this to something that you are taking into account that it is farm-wide. All right, so by default, we're keeping 14 days of logs. We've also got an option now to restrict the trace log disk space usage. So say how much space can those logs burn up. So what we can do is if we select that, look at what happened though. Maximum storage space for trace logs in gigabytes, 1,000. That might have been a mistake, right? Somewhere along the way there, I don't think anyone ever really meant to have 1,000 gigs of trace logs be the default. So you might want to change that to something a little more practical, like 10. I don't know. Just could be me. Maybe you guys have more disk space than I do. Okay, so let's cancel out of this. So the next thing I want to look at here is the Health Analyzer, the top set of options. So if I go into rule definitions, you're going to see that SharePoint 2010 RTM ships with about 63-ish rules. And these different rules, what they're doing is they're looking at your farm and they're looking for common mistakes or common issues that you should be watching out for, right? So for example, databases used by SharePoint has fragmented indices. Oh, that's kind of that's bad, right? Well, on the bright side is, yes, that's bad, and we're going to check for this once a day. And if we find it, though, there's a repair automatically option. So SharePoint's actually going to find that problem and then just go fix the problem. That's pretty cool. So some of these rules do things like that, right? The timer service failed to recycle. It checks once a week. You'll see things like, I don't see it off the top of my head, but things like, the paging file size should exceed the amount of physical RAM. So just, suggestions of good ideas for you. Some of them we can fix automatically. One of them, if I dig through the list here, it says something like automatically or check if the C drive is running low on space. I wouldn't want them to automatically fix that for me, right? What are they going to do? Arbitrarily delete files until it makes some space? It's not a good idea. So some fix, some do not. So the one that I want you to look at right now is this one right here. One or more categories are configured with verbose trace logging. So we click on this. And so it says, hey, I'm going to check once a day, and I'm not going to repair it automatically. Look at this, though. I can set up for an alert, right, because this is really just a SharePoint list item. And I can also run now this report. I'm going to run it now. Say close. So now if I go back to the home page of Central Admin, and then go back to my monitoring, and go to Review About Solutions, this is a SharePoint list of all the issues I currently have in my farm, right? And, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to click that. So then what I can do is go in here and say, all right, I see you, you're broken, but look, it's repair automatically. So now I can say, all right, go fix that for me. Okay, now that that's going to fix that for me, also check again. Close it out here, refresh page, voila. It has cleaned it up now and back to a good state of health. It is worth noting this is a SharePoint list. I know I said that, but the reason I point it out is, you know, if I go in here and review rule definitions and say, let's just do that one. Well, let's do, sorry, I want one that'll fire. All right, this one will fire for me. So I'm going to fire this one off real quick. So close, go back over here to monitoring. And when this one shows up, right, because normally when you come in here for the first time, you got a whole bunch of them, and you'll see a little marker across the top of the page that says, you know, you have problems, right? It's either yellow or red, depending on the severity of your problems. The reason I point out these list items is right before I did this demo, I had about 25 in here, different things wrong with my farm. I came in, hit the little selector, and said delete all these SharePoint items, right? It's just deleting the little entry in the list. So now I don't have to have the problems anymore. Tricky, tricky. All right, so go back to monitoring. Go back over here to configure diagnostic logging. And notice access services. The trace level, thanks to that rule, was reset to medium. And these guys are still verbose. So how do I fix these? No problem. Hit the little multi-selector here. And I could select one at a time if I wanted, but I'm going to select them all. Go down here. Leaves critical events report to the event log. I could remember that it was supposed to be information, but instead, look at that beautiful option. Reset to defaults. Oh, that makes me so happy. Voila. Configure diagnostic logging, and now they're all back to non-bolded, which is because they're all they're all back to the default settings. So hopefully that just got thunderous applause from all of you. I'm imagining it because that's a pretty spectacular but simple feature. Something else I want to point out here with the different reporting, I don't want to get into the reporting as much as I want to make sure that you guys all understand that these reports have all got controls, right? So you can do your own custom filtering and stuff. A lot of people are missing this functionality. So they're saying, hey, this is great, but I need to drill down, you know, and filter this report on some other things, or, you know, filter on specific ranges. How do I do that? And they're missing that there's an analyze option. So that was by the web analytics report. That's right, if I go into like the administrative reports, so the search team gave us some of those. So when I open this report, same type of thing, is that there's a bunch of filters up here. So I found people are missing this. I thought that was worth pointing out real quick. All right, so that's the monitoring. One other thing on the monitoring tab here, if you look at your timer job definitions, you're like, hey, I need this audit log trimming to run right now. SharePoint 2007, next to impossible. SharePoint 2010, there's a big fat button that says run now. Oh, that makes me so happy. If we go back over to monitoring and say check job status, I can never get this to catch where I can actually demo it, but you actually will see the job when it's running. You'll see the progress here, and there's a little progress bar indicator. You'll also see that we get a status of all these guys. So when I click on succeeded here, I can see when it happened, and what went on with that. The reason I point that out is if you had an error, you would click on error, and the actual error message for why that happened would be right here, instead of in 2007 where I had to go dig that out of the event log, for example. So, good stuff there. All right. Backup and restore. One thing to note here, the farm-wide backup. When we do a farm-wide backup, we still have the same type of thing where we're not going to back up and restore your configuration databases. But Microsoft gives an answer to that question this time. And if you select all these, go in here and say next, what we can do is we can back up only configuration settings. So this will create an XML file that is a dump of all the configuration settings for our farm that we could then take over to another farm and restore it and get the same type of configuration settings back. So even though you can't take your configuration database with you, you can do a backup of all your configuration settings and take that with you. That's pretty cool. You also, under configure backup settings, you can control the number of threads that are allocated to the backup process or the restore process, so how hard is it going to beat up your server. There is still no schedule here. If you wanted to schedule a farm backup, what do you need to do? You need to use your friend PowerShell, and you need to use the backup sp farm commandlet with all the appropriate switches. You put all that into then a Windows scheduled task and have that run every night at 2 a.m. to back up your SharePoint farm if you want to use that method. Additionally here on the granular backups, this is new, we can do site collection backups. We can export a site or list, that's new. So we can actually do all this from Central Admin. And we can now use export to go down not just the web level, but the actual list level. So that's a new thing. Then you have what I would argue is a feature worth upgrading to SharePoint 20 all on its own. And that is recover data from an unattached content database. So what we can do here, say that you've got a SQL Server backup of your database from last month, right? Someone says, hey, I need this one document back from a month ago off of SharePoint. 2007, you'd have to take that database, go over to a brand new, unique farm, right? Build up a new farm, restore that database, export that content out, and then re-import it into your production farm, right? It'd be a giant pain in your backside. SharePoint 2010, that is not the case. What we could do is we could go on a SQL Server, do a SQL Server restore that database, give it any old name we want, so call it month-old-restore, name the database that. We'd come in here, then we'd say, all right, now that it's done, we can do month-old-restore is our database name. And this will actually be able to then look into that database, and we can browse the content of that database without it actually being mounted in SharePoint. So now we're working our way through the database. We're saying, oh, there's the list that her document was in. Let's export that list out of the unattached database, and then do an import to get it back into wherever she wanted it restored. So that's just fabulous. That's amazing. I'm at a loss of words at how good of a feature that is. I really recommend you guys you to look at that one. And it really makes, for those of you that are doing SQL database backups, it just gave you another option to make your lives easier. So very cool. All right, running out of time here. Security, this stuff, you do have the concept of managed accounts this time, right? Anytime in SharePoint that you use an account, so for example, when I create a web application and I create a new application pool, I can't just say use this username and password. I have to say use this managed account. So you're going to have to get familiar with managed accounts. Now the beauty of managed accounts is that we have the capability of, so we create an account in Active Directory, right? I go in, Active Directory, users and computers, add an account called SharePoint Search. I add that account, I then come into SharePoint and I configure that as a managed account. So I say, hey, I've already done it. Register managed account. And so I say this is the account, so it would be, we'll make Tyson one. SP911 Tyson. Here's his password. And then what I do, so I could just take that simple step. So this now makes this a registered account. So the managed account now knows that username and password. And so now I could go in and choose that as an option for configuring a service account, right? But what I can do, where the real power in this lies, is I have the ability to have it automatically set him a password, right? So if I don't want anyone to know my service account passwords, I mean I don't want anyone to, I can tell SharePoint to automatically generate him a password, change it in AD, and, SharePoint, it's yours to manage from now on. I can also say, I want this password to automatically change, based on what my domain policy is. So if the domain policy says this password has to change every 60 days, SharePoint just automatically changes password every 60 days, right? And for any of you that's ever had to change a Swiss account password in SharePoint 2007, you didn't get it right on the first try, right? It was a giant pain in your backside to do. 2010 is no problem. If I want to change the password to even something I know, okay, let me come in here, change the password. And instead of using an existing password, what I would do is I would let SharePoint still change it, and I would just tell SharePoint to change it to Shane is cool. Not that I would use that as my password for everything. Don't try that to break into my servers. But you get the idea there that, SharePoint can now manage these accounts for you. And that's all done through the Security tab. And if I go right to App Management, Manage Web App real quick, and do a new one, you'll see this is where, when I create the app pool, I'm like, oh, I create a new app pool. I can't put in the account. I have to use one of the managed accounts. But now when the password gets changed from the managed account, I don't have to tell the web app to do it because it's already done. SharePoint handles all that for me. All right, so that's some of the fun with security stuff. Upgrade and migration. So this is where we went in to review our database statuses. The check product and patch installation status, this is where you could tell if all the servers in your farm are running the same build. So you can see that both of mine are running this one build, so everything is the same. That's good. If there was one that had a patch installed and another one did not, it would show up over here in the install status with a link to, hey, this server needs this patch installed. And these aren't Windows patches, these are SharePoint patches, but it'd tell me which server needed what SharePoint patch to be installed and configured. All right, finishing up real quick. General app settings, this is where, some of your different stuff is. Some of these things are showing in other places. Here's your content deployment, info path is in here as well. We showed you another place to do SharePoint Designer. The other question people come up is, where do I manage my sites? That is actually part of a service application, right? Manage service apps, and under user profile service apps, you'd click on manage here, and this is where all this stuff is managed. So a lot of people have a hard time finding that as well. Okay, and so on that note, I think that'll conclude our demo.